They're demanding, you're going to love this, Vivek, they are demanding that we have an international criminal court prosecution of, wait for it, something called ecocide. Ecocide. This is coming out of Davos. Ecocide. Now, I don't know what they think they're talking about. Mr. Trump or President Trump will never buy into that. What does this crowd want? Everything they want. Global warming, John Kerry, it's freezing out in Iowa. Nobody seems to understand that. Big government solutions, big corporate solutions, not small government, small business, entrepreneurial solutions. You know, Vivek, if you stay with Trump and you go into his government, I want you to go after Davos. You're going to be the special emissary to go to Davos and quiet that crowd down. I won't say blow them up because that would be wrong, but quiet them down or give them a facelift or do something for heaven's sake.
We're not going to quiet them down. We're going to shut them down. That's what we're going to do, Larry. And I think that you ask what's motivating them. Yeah. Here's the answer, Larry. It's just like every three-letter agency here. We should think about ATF, CDC, Department of Education. That's a three-letter multilateral institution, WEF. My answer to all of them with acronyms is shut them down. What they want is old world Europe. You ask what they want. It's actually a revival of old world monarchy that was skeptical of self-governance. That's what King George believed. That's what the kings of old world Europe believed. And we fought a revolution in 1776 to say that for better or worse, we the people, the citizens of this nation, engage in self-governance. We're the ones who decide how we fight climate change, whether or how we fight racism or whatever the alleged challenge is. We the people make those decisions at the ballot box, not in the mountaintops of Davos. This is that ugly monster of the old world rearing its head again in the avatar of Klaus Schwab and Larry Fink and the others who speak that old world vision. And we should say absolutely no to that vision. We're a self-governing constitutional republic. That's what it means to be an American. And that's what it means to stand for our 1776 ideals in this country. And you have my word, I will stop at nothing. You know, talking about peaceful means, of course, but stop at nothing, legally and otherwise, to make sure that these people are put back in their place and we have true sovereignty in the United States of America.
Day 4 in Davos. Is the U.S. election casting a dark cloud over this event? Find out this and more, only on The Reading Room. The fear is real, and how we know this is that Davos dedicated a special session, particularly to talk about what to expect from a possible Republican administration. Yes, friends, they carved out one session specifically to talk about the threat that Donald Trump may pose to the rest of the world. So in this conversation, we had some really good speakers. One of them was Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, standing up for American values and what it would mean for Americans should Donald Trump get another term in office. We have to applaud him for standing up and being brave, having a conversation that most likely made a lot of people in the room very uncomfortable.
And you said yourself a minute ago, anyone who's kind of not with the program is not going to be in an administration. You know, one thing that Davos, you might say, and the people come here stand up for, is liberal democracy. So if the idea that's going to be swept under the table is part of the idea, hopefully that's not what he means. What do you mean? What do you think he means by retribution?
Well, it's laughable that you would, or anyone would describe Davos as protecting liberal democracy. It's equally,
standing up for it.
It's equally laughable to use the word dictatorship at Davos and aim that at President Trump. In fact, I think that's absurd. But I'm going to step aside from that constructive criticism and instead answer your question.
Yep.
And I'm going to be substantive here. President Trump, if he's the next president, for that matter, I think whoever the next conservative president is going to take on the power of the elites, which I mentioned earlier. But the thing that I want to drive home here, the very reason that I'm here at Davos, is to explain to many people in this room and who are watching, with all due respect, nothing personal, but that you're part of the problem. Political elites tell the average people on 3 or 4 or 5 issues that the reality is X, when in fact reality is Y. Take immigration. Elites tell us that open borders and even illegal immigration are okay. The average person tells us in the United States that both rob them of the American way of life. They're right. President Trump will take that on behalf of the average American. Elites also tell us that public safety isn't a problem in big American cities. Just travel to New York or Washington or Dallas, Texas. The average person will tell you that the lack of public safety damages not just the American way of life, but their life. President Trump will take that on. Thirdly, I guess the favorite at the World Economic Forum is climate change. Elites tell us that we have this existential crisis with so-called climate change, so much so that climate alarmism is probably the greatest cause for mental health crisis in the world. The solutions, the average person know, based on climate change are far worse and more harmful and cost more human lives, especially in Europe during the time that you need heating, than do the problem and the problems themselves. Fourth, two more here, Robin. Okay. The fourth, China. The number one adversary, not just to the United States, but to free people on planet Earth. Not only do we at Davos not say that, we give the Chinese Communist Party a platform. Count on President Trump ending that nonsense. And fifth, as we sit here, another supranational organization, the World Health Organization, is discussing foisting gender ideology upon the global South. These are practices that are under review, if not being rejected, by countries in Northern Europe. The new president, especially if it's President Trump, will, as you like to say, trust the science. He will understand the basic biological reality of manhood and womanhood. And do you know why? Not because of retribution, not because he's a dictator, but because he has the power of the American people behind him. And it's connected to Senator Portman's excellent point that in addition to needing a vigorous executive, we look forward to having the popular will inform both the House and Senate in 2025 to pass laws on all of those issues and many others. Ultimately, Robin, I think President Trump, if in fact he wins a second term, is going to be inspired by the wise words of Javier Milei, who said that he was in power not to guide sheep, but to awaken lions. That's what the average American and the average free person on planet Earth wants out of leaders.
Unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long live freedom. Damn it.
The one thing I will challenge, we can come back to it later on, Kevin, is what will be the mandate of the American people if, A, the mandate tends to be not a plurality of the vote.
If he wins the election, the mandate's clear.
Kevin keeps saying if he wins the election. Can I ask Kevin, is there any conceivable way in which if he loses the election, he will accept that he's lost the election, or whether you would accept that?
What was the last part?
Would you accept if he loses the election that he's lost the election, or would it be like last time?
If we're sure that there's election integrity, but I'm not sure that we can be.
Well, yeah,
I think you've answered my question there.
We're not going to get to the end of that one, so park that one for the moment. And let me just say one thing that WEF stands up for very strongly is Ukraine and its right to exist and defend itself. So if that's something you think also needs to be swept away, let us know, yeah? But on China as well, what would be done differently, if you see what I'm saying? Ukraine and China.
Let me just correct the slight assertion you made there. We want Ukraine to win. We want to see Ukraine win with a lot more help from European allies. I think the United States has a role. Heritage has been clear about this for 2 years now, that there is a world in which we support military aid for Ukraine. I think the entire American right would, or almost all of them, provided it's 100% focused on military aid. There is real transparency in how the funds are used, and it's just a fact. This is not conveyed pejoratively. If you look at our index of economic freedom at Heritage, Ukraine's in the bottom 10 on government transparency. We don't celebrate that. We wish that were different, but the transparency concern, which the political right has voiced from the beginning, is real. Thirdly, it actually needs to have a strategic end game, and the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has done a god-awful job in articulating what that is, particularly from the standpoint of what's in the best interest of Americans. Those two issues are very much linked, but not in the way the conversation goes here at the World Economic Forum. That is to say that from the perspective of the United States, because our first obligation in foreign policy is to look at it through the lens of what's best for the American citizen, the much bigger threat is the Chinese Communist Party. And not just because of their imminent threats or their threats for imminent action against Taiwan, especially after the outcome of Saturday's election, but because the Chinese are a far greater economic power, and I would even argue cultural power in the world, not just in the United States. Therefore, we would argue, to sum up here, Robin, for the next conservative president to be a prioritizer. It's not an either-or question, and too much of the media commentary puts that as a false choice. It's not. It's a matter of realizing this fact. This year, as no doubt the great fiscal senator Rob Portman would know, the United States is going to pay $750 billion in interest alone. I'm telling you, from the standpoint of the American political center right, that has to change before European countries, especially in Germany and France, wag their finger about what we're supposed to do on their behalf.
Great. Thank you very much. Very clear again. Right, let's get some questions in. I'm going to take a little group.
And with this dark cloud hanging over, the WEF is fully prepared on defending truth, in which today a special session was dedicated to just that, in protecting, making sure that democracy, is protecting and defending truth. And what better panel of experts than to have representation from America's biggest propaganda arms, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, to have this authentic conversation. You really can't make this up.
Truth is obviously the foundation on which all of the other discussions are based. And if you look at the world that we're in at the moment, it does feel like this idea of defending truth, defending the truth, is a kind of mission impossible. Aeschylus famously said that that truth is the first casualty of war. Donald Trump used to love calling the New York Times the failing New York Times, until at least he realized that he was maybe one of the big contributors to turning the New York Times into the enormous commercial success that it became. Meredith, can you tell us what lessons you learned, both from that period, but also how you think about the role of a global media organization in this era of disinformation?
Great sort of specific and then broad question, and thanks for having me here. Let me just push on one thing you said, which is that you associated Trump with the sort of success of the Times. I would say certainly the giant political story that began in 2016 and continued has been of great interest, and that made even more audience come to the New York Times, and I'm sure it made even more people subscribe. But I would say for the Times and the Journal, Emma is also here, and all of the major serious news organizations, we are all sort of bigger than any one story or any one topic area, and we continue to have a very strong, very engaged audience and grow subscriptions long after he was president of the United States. So I'll note that. In terms, I'm actually going to follow some of what Vera said. I would say that we are living in as dark a moment in history as I have known. I suspect many people feel that way, and in that, the world needs more high-quality, independent journalism that's willing to hold power to account. And what I think we're not talking enough about is what journalism actually needs from the world. And I think you're pushing on that. And I'd name a handful of things. One is the opportunity for journalists to do their work in a way that is free from intimidation, harassment, legal threat. And that is something that I think until recently we thought, particularly in democracies, was a settled matter, even something sacred. And I think many of us are quite concerned about that. So that's one thing. The second thing I would say is we need to help the public be more media literate as to the value and importance of independent journalism. I think it's very hard for many reasons to distinguish what it is and isn't. And we need a public that understands the value of journalism that's from a posture of sort of searching rather than knowing, and that doesn't play for a side or a team. And third, I think we need sustainable business models for media companies. Vera said you need professional media organizations. Well, those organizations have to be able to make money to put their reporters into harm's way, have the people who endeavor to keep them safe, have expert editors, have all the people who find and build audience. That is really intense, expensive work. requires people who can do great kind of human ingenuity and technological innovation, and it costs a lot of money. And we need an information ecosystem that rewards and recognizes and values that. And my experience at the Times over the last 10 years is if we're not pushing on all of those things at the same time, you get, where we are now, proliferation of lots and lots of less high quality content and a real challenge to the relationship between the publisher and the reader. You called it a citizen, the end user, who should be in a direct relationship for news.
Great.
Now, this woman isn't being fully transparent with the audience. She's failing to mention that Americans have lost trust in the mainstream media as a result of the lies that they have been telling and the control that our current government has on them. So take, for example, the Hunter Biden laptop. That has been the biggest thing that came out of 2023, exposing the mainstream media as being controlled by the government and, in certain cases, either not covering stories that should be covered or flat out lying and pushing propaganda on behalf of our government. So what we are seeing here now is her hands are tied. She recognizes that, she has to go along with the agenda, but at the same time, they're losing money. And the solution is going after the independent journalists in order to corral them, in order to keep them under control in this so-called professional network. And then part of the so-called defense is by adding in the layer of these so-called fact checkers, in which a lot of these fact checkers are now being backed by dark money from liberal progressives like George Soros or Pierre Omidyar. Listen to what the woman from the Wall Street Journal had to say. She's equally uncomfortable.
So, Emma, the meta theme for this year's Davos is this idea of building trust. And that's one of the biggest challenges for media organizations in this media environment that's awash with different information from conflicting sources. How do you go about building trust?
Well, I really want to echo a lot of what Meredith said there. I agree with it entirely. I think there's a very specific challenge for the legacy brands like the New York Times and like the Wall Street Journal. I mean, interestingly, when there's a big news event, a big world event, people still come to the legacy brands. We still have a lot of trust. But I think you only have to go back. I think we have to maintain that trust, and we have to work at maintaining it in a way that we didn't have to do.
And that's because before social media, they didn't have a place where people could be fact-checking on them. So you lose trust when you turn out to be lying and manipulating the public, which is exactly what these organizations were doing.
Not so long ago. So if you go back really not that long ago, as I say, we owned the news. We were the gatekeepers, and we very much owned the facts as well. If it said it in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, then that was a fact.
It's so scary to me to hear the language she's using. Like, we were the gatekeepers. We were in charge of the facts. Do you see the power that they had and they don't have anymore? They hate this. They hate the independent journalists.
Nowadays, people can go to all sorts of different sources for the news, and they're much more questioning about what we're saying. So it's no longer good enough for us just to say, this is what happened, or this is the news. We have to explain, almost like explain our working. So readers expect to understand how we source stories. They want to know how we go about getting stories. We have to sort of lift the bonnet, as it were, and in a way that newspapers aren't used to doing, and explain to people what we're doing. We need to be much more transparent about how we go about collecting the news in order to keep that trust, because the trust is our most valuable asset. And the minute we let go of that, then our business models, frankly, will fall apart. That also means we have to correct our mistakes. We have to be honest when we make mistakes. We have to not be afraid of that. And I think, as well, we need to have a much more open relationship with our readers. We have to be more responsive to what they want, what they expect of us, and we have to, just have more of a dialogue. It used to be very much de haut en bas with newspapers, and I think those days are over. And I think the feeling we get is that readers really enjoy that. They like it. They like us to open up and tell them what we're going on. I think the challenge for us is the people who say they trust us and want to understand why they should trust us tend to be the same people. We're preaching to the converted. The challenge is, how do we reach the people out there who don't read the Wall Street Journal, who don't read the New York Times, who don't listen to the BBC or whatever? How do we persuade them of the value of trusted news?
And this is the problem with these folks. They talk about having transparency and dialogue. No, have debate with people that are disagreeing with you in order to come to some type of consensus. Having conversations with people who have similar mindset, no wonder why you're not being able to penetrate into other areas. You're still talking in the same group. So if you're showing views that are of one side, doesn't really serve a purpose. You're not reaching the people who are countering you in order to address that. That's the only way you're going to be able to build back trust in order for us to have a balanced view. But when it's so one-sided and so supportive and not going against whatever is going on with the current administration, then, to us, absolutely, why would you trust government state-controlled media? That's propaganda. And this is the problem with these folks. They talk about having transparency and dialogue. No, have debate with people that are disagreeing with you in order to come to some type of consensus. Having conversations with people who have similar mindset, no wonder why you're not being able to penetrate into other areas. You're still talking in the same group. So if you're showing views that are of one side, doesn't really serve a purpose. You're not reaching the people who are countering you in order to address that. That's the only way you're going to be able to build back trust in order for us to have a balanced view. But when it's so one-sided and so supportive and not going against whatever is going on with the current administration, then, to us, absolutely, why would you trust government state-controlled media? That's propaganda. Imagine what would happen if, let's say, one of them admitted, yeah, we lied about the Hunter Biden laptop. The stock would crash. So they're kind of caught in a rock and a hard place. Had they told the truth from the beginning, then they wouldn't be in this situation. But we are here now, and oh well, too bad. So the UN, recognizing that they've lost control of the narrative, decides to create this application called iVerify, in which you could use their automated fact-checking tool to help identify false information and prevent its spread, to cut down on the misinformation-disinformation crisis. But here's the problem. The UN is also guilty of spreading misinformation and disinformation. Called out by independent journalist Michael Schellenberger, he shows everybody that they are equally guilty of doing this. And as a result, the UN decides to make sure that they censor Michael Schellenberger. So here we have this attempt to control the narrative, but failing miserably for the world to see. And they can't understand why people don't trust them. Now, what we have to keep in the back of our heads is that, remember, this is a small group of people. They are the minority, and they are screaming the loudest because they have the money and power to do so. But in order for all of this to work, they need us. Now, listen to the CEO of Salesforce talk about how AI is going to actually replace humans. You tell me if you feel comfortable that doctors could actually be replaced with AI.
You have this massive organization, use massive amounts of technology. What do you think? What are human beings going to be best at in a world of AI?
Well, I don't know. When do you think we're going to have our first WEF panel moderated by an AI? I've been sitting on this stage for a lot of years. I'm always looking down at someone. Got a great moderator right here with Yusuf. But maybe it's not that far along. Maybe pretty soon, a couple years, we're going to have a WEF digital moderator sitting in that chair, moderating this panel, and maybe doing a pretty good job because it's going to have access to a lot of the information that we have. Now, I think that it's going to evoke the question of, are we going to trust it? I think that trust kind of comes up right up the hierarchy pretty darn quick. We're going to have digital doctors, digital people. These digital people are going to emerge, and there's going to have to be a level of trust.
Digital doctors, digital people. How do you feel about that? Would you feel comfortable if you had the choice to pick, let's say, a robot to operate on you versus an actual human, and knowing that it could cost you maybe a fraction of what it would cost to have a human do it? Would you take that leap? I don't know, folks. They're playing too much with God in this field. Also, what they're trying to do with this technology, for the most part, already exists. Like, take, for example, monitoring people's brainwaves. They're looking seriously to get your personal insights and mandating it in schools and also the workplace in order to drive certain behaviors in certain school of thought. Believe it or not, this technology exists, and they're doing it in China. To me, I think this crosses the line of ethics, and it should be banned. It won't be too long till this neurotechnology then actually gets implanted in your head. Here's what they had to say about this at Davos last year.
So, first off, a video. It's going to make you see the future and understand a wonderful future where we can use brainwaves to fight crime, be more productive, and find love. Let's roll.
You're in the zone. Even you can't believe how productive you've been. Your memo is finished, your inbox is under control, and you're feeling sharper than you have in a decade. Sensing your joy, your playlist shifts to your favorite song, sending chills up your spine as the music begins to play. You glance at the program running in the background on your computer screen and notice a now familiar sight that appears whenever you're overloaded with pleasure. Your theta brainwave activity decreasing in the temporal regions of your brain. You mentally move the cursor to the left and scroll through your brain data over the past few hours. You can see your stress levels rising as the deadline to finish your memo approached, causing a peak in your beta brainwave activity right before an alert popped up, telling you to take a brain break. But what's that unusual change in your brain activity when you're asleep? It started earlier in the month. You send a text message to your doctor with a mental swipe of your cursor. Could you take a quick look at my brain data? Anything to worry about? Your mind starts to wander to the new colleague on your team, whom you know you shouldn't be daydreaming about, given the policy against intra-office romance. But you can't help fantasizing just a little. But then you start to worry that your boss will notice your amorous feelings when she checks your brain activity and shift your attention back to the present. You breathe a sigh of relief when the email she sends you later that day congratulates you on your brain metrics from the past quarter, which have earned you another performance bonus. You head home jamming to the music, with your work-issued brain-sensing earbuds still in. When you arrive at work the next day, a somber cloud has fallen over the office. Along with emails, text messages, and GPS location data, the government has subpoenaed employees' brainwave data from the past year. They have compelling evidence that one of your coworkers has committed massive wire fraud. Now, they're looking for his co-conspirators. You discover they are looking for synchronized brain activity between your coworker and the people he has been working with. While you know you're innocent of any crime, you've been secretly working with him on a new startup venture. Shaking, you remove your earbuds.
What do you think? Is it a future you're ready for? You may be surprised to learn that it's a future that has already arrived. Everything in that video that you just saw is based on technology that is already here today. Artificial intelligence has enabled advances in decoding brain activity in ways that we never before thought possible.
So this woman, Nita Farahani, is back again this year at Davos, this time around raising the red flag around ethics. Not sure what changed between last year and this year, but she makes some very good points in which I think we really need to just back off of even thinking about doing this. And that is because the people who are behind doing this do not have the right intention, whether it be for power, for greed. They have not put people first. Because if they did, then the issue around solving ethics should have been the first thing that they worked on before developing this out. But we are where we are. All we can say is no, do not comply and resist it.
Three major ethical issues I'll just put on the table. One is the context in which they'll be used. When used by individuals to gain better insights into their personal health and well-being, this is a great use case for people to gain greater introspection and interoception. When used coercively, for example, in an educational setting or in a workplace where people are mandated to have their brain activity monitored, it becomes deeply problematic that this final frontier of privacy is one that people can't reclaim. The second ethical issue is the inclusivity of the data. A lot of the data sets that have been built until now in many ways are biased because they've excluded people of different skin colors, for example, or different hair types that interfere with the sensors. The result is that a lot of the data is skewed, and if the data is skewed and high stakes decisions like hiring and firing or workplace decisions are being made about individuals or about children in classrooms, that is also deeply concerning. And the last and deeply concerning area of ethical concern is the aggregation and the collection of this data, especially in a world in which most business models for major tech companies have been based on the aggregation of personal data in ways that allow them to gain insights about individuals, but also allow, for example, targeted advertisement, the use of kind of closed loop systems that change environments in response to people's data that could nudge them and coercively shift how they think and they feel. Brain data in particular, or cognitive biometrics, the broader class of data from eye tracking and other information, needs to, from my perspective, be kept on device and overwritten such that the raw data where discrimination or other types of concerns could arise are very limited and safeguarded by individuals through encryption and other on-device protections.
In my opinion, if we ever get to a place where this becomes the standard and is enforced in schools as well as in the workforce as the normal, we're done as society. It's over. As much as we don't want to admit that these psychopaths are actually doing this to us in the world, they are. They're on the world stage telling us with full transparency that this is the way that we need to go. Everything that they're talking about is impacting us. I'm going to leave with this final clip that I found online that summarizes exactly what has been happening. Hopefully this message wakes people up.
So I think it's safe to say that what is going on at the border is absolutely 100% deliberate, and not just in this country, the US. Same thing's happening in the UK. The UK that has had a conservative government for 13 years just happens to be dealing with the same issue. All over the Western world, this is happening, an invasion of illegals. And you have the same story. They're getting put up in hotels, they're being given all this free stuff. All these resources are suddenly available for illegals, but weren't available for citizens themselves. So clearly there appears to be a global agenda that's going on before our very eyes. Is this to ensure the collapse of the Western world? Sorry if I'm stating the obvious to a lot of people, but it just seems that it really doesn't matter who you vote for. It really doesn't matter who is in power. This was the plan from the very beginning. I'm telling you, man, put your trust in God, because this world is about to get worse.
In a perfect world, all of this sounds wonderful, but we all know that the people that are involved more than likely are doing this for selfish reasons and are extremely corrupt. We know quite a few characters in the political sphere that you shouldn't trust. What I do think, though, is that should there be a shift and a pushback and the people have more of a voice and more feeling or a sense of control and being able to maintain their personal sovereignty, then there could be some type of give and take. But in this situation, with this organization, they are making decisions for you. And I'm not sure how you feel about that, but for me, I do not comply, and I will not comply. It really does fall on each of us to take responsibility to learn about what's going on and decide for ourselves if this is the future that we want. But until then, I do hope that you do come back and join me on this journey of learning what is really going on so we can make these decisions and make the right ones. But if you like this video, please do not forget to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe, because I will be dropping more videos pertaining to this Davos annual meeting and uncovering what it's really all about. And you definitely don't want to miss it. But until then, I ask you please be safe, and I'll see you soon.